This is Innovation Connected, coming to you from the World Economic Forum in Davos, a podcast by Tenity.
My name is Max, I'm a venture partner for Tenity, and I would like to welcome my esteemed guest Alex from Hong Kong. Welcome. Maybe you can do a quick intro, what you did so far in your life, and what are you mainly focusing on at the moment?
Sure. Max, it's lovely to be here in Davos. Thank you for having me on the podcast. By way of background, I'm an Australian, but born and raised in Hong Kong. I went to the German school in Hong Kong, so Germany, has played a role, throughout my life. And I went to university in Paris, and then got started in a small German investment bank, actually, in London, before moving into strategy consulting with Monitor Group. I started in London, but moved to New Delhi, which was a very exciting period, and then moved from strategy consulting into operations consulting with Porsche. So I was with Porsche Consulting for almost 6 years, worked with them all around the world in supply chain optimization, but also in a number of different industries. Then moved from operations consulting to Apple in Shanghai. I was there for almost 4 years in what was essentially a macro strategist role, managing labor or workers in Apple's supply chain. So I looked after about 1.7 million workers across 400 factories within Apple's supply chain. So I was there in Shanghai, but all across China until 2018, before moving back to Hong Kong, where I got involved in two things. My first real foray into the digital asset space was with a trade finance blockchain for trade finance startup, where they were tokenizing invoices that could then be traded on a decentralized exchange to maturity, like a bond. Mm-hmm. It was really interesting at the time, learning about that space and how blockchain technology could be applied to it. But it was definitely, as it still is today, too early, in my opinion, for trade finance in the space. So I, in parallel, had started Chavanette Advisors, where I am managing partner, and we have a focus on regulated digital currency. So we are primarily focused on central bank digital currency, or now more commonly known as CBDC, and also stablecoins and tokenized deposits. So we are, I wouldn't say the antithesis to crypto, but we are focused on the regulated side of digital currency, more so than the other.
Well, I think in general, globally, there is a whole, let's say, movement of regulation, isn't it? So, or would you say it's still so divided that you have the people who force or will go into non-regulated versus the regulated part?
So I think, hot topic this year has obviously been MyCar on the crypto side, and I think we're starting to see stablecoin regulations come into place more broadly. I mean, also in Hong Kong, our where our primary office is. But at the same time, I think there's still quite a way to go on the crypto side from a global perspective. Central banks, though, want to make sure that they stay relevant, right? We need to I think they want to make sure that they maintain kind of sovereignty,
control,
and well, you could use that term, but I think you certainly need a sovereign currency through which to deploy monetary policy.
Yes. Yeah.
And to have as a base currency, in every country. And so what you're starting to see now is the slow rollout of CBDCs worldwide. So let's just say that there are 190 odd central banks. 95% of them are involved in either researching developing, piloting, or have launched their central bank digital currency. So around the world, they're all at different stages, but we have a number that have launched. Started with the Sand Dollar in the Bahamas in 2020. Then you have the Jamdex from Jamaica. You have the e-Naira in Nigeria. And then you have a number of what I would consider are very important currencies like the ECNY and the digital rupee in India, both of which are still considered in their pilot phases, even though they have transaction volumes which are significantly higher than in the CBDC markets where they're already live.
So can you say something about the volumes? I mean, what is significant higher? If like 10 to 1 or if it's 10 million to 1 million, just to give a bit of an idea to the audience.
Yeah, it's more like 100 to 1, right? It's more like 100 to 1. But I think there are reasons for why some of these currencies are not officially live and remain in a pilot phase.
I mean, there's a lot of news always about that. Who is now having the next phase or the next rollout? There was a big one between, I think, also China and the UAE, which had got a lot of attention globally, or at least in media outlets. Can you say something to that?
So I think maybe the project you're referring to is one from the BIS Innovation Hub. It was called Project Mbridge, which is a wholesale CBDC project, which involved a number of jurisdictions. It actually started between the Hong Kong Monetary Authority and the Bank of Thailand, and then expanded to include the People's Bank of China, and also the Central Bank of the UAE, and then later the Saudi Central Bank. And I think, I think that project reached a stage of maturity where the Bank for International Settlements has decided to hand that back to the central banks, right? To now, see how it plays out and for it to matriculate and mature in its own way without that support.
Maybe let's get a couple of steps back. I mean, we heard about CBDCs law over years. We heard a lot, this is only wholesale. Then we have a big stablecoin hype. And then on the other side, we have the blockchain where we say, okay, democratize, you're in control of your own assets. You don't need an intermediary. Actually, this is all with intermediaries, all these different, let's say, players. Maybe you can explain on your opinion, first of all, what is a CBDC by definition? Is there different definitions globally? And then we go from this wholesale to retail approach. And what is your opinion on that? If you can, first of all, really give a quick definition how it is, because I think there's a term which is globally used, but not often, 100% everybody sees it the same.
Yeah, so I think there is no official definition of what CBDC is.
Yes.
But it is a digital form of any country's sovereign money, right? Now, when it comes to wholesale and retail, you have wholesale CBDC, which is essentially the money that will be moved between central banks or between central banks and commercial banks or between commercial banks. And then you have what we call retail CBDC, which is the money that we will be using for everyday purchases, right? Wholesale CBDC largely happens in the background, right? So as end users like ourselves, we don't see that happening, right? It's taking place between the institutions.
Maybe one question here.
Sure.
What's the problem currently there, and why is it needed then?
Well, I think people talk about like real-time gross settlement, so the RTGS system. Wholesale CBDC and retail CBDC both need to happen. So as you move toward a digital economy, you will have wholesale CBDC happening first, and then retail CBDC. Given that there's so much more involved in setting up retail CBDC, it's most likely going to follow. And so some of the stalling that you've seen at the moment, or some of the changing narratives that we're seeing out there, are largely around central banks realizing that they need to do or want to do wholesale CBDC first before they moved to retail CBDC. And with retail CBDC, in many cases, now in the case of like the PBOC and the Reserve Bank of India, they've developed those solutions in-house. With retail CBDC in many other countries, they are looking to develop, to onboard third-party vendors, right? And there's an increasing number of vendors out there that are vying for this space. We produced at Chavanette something called the Galactic Grid, which is a CBDC technology assessment framework. So really what we call the compass through the chaos, helping central banks to navigate this increasingly noisy space of CBDC technology vendors. So we have reviewed them, ranked them, and compared them to help central banks to make decisions around the technology that they want to adopt based on the requirements of that country.
Okay, what is technology? What kind of technology is necessary to do that?
So, great question. There's always look, we've been hearing about blockchain forever. I would say this: you're seeing blockchain being used in wholesale CBDC. Why? Because you have fewer transactions, and they're large transactions, right? In retail CBDC with end users, if you think about how many transactions we make every single day, you quite quickly come up against a transactions per minute or TPM restriction, right? And so what you're seeing is much more centralized technologies being used on the retail side. Important also to think about things like we're up here in the mountains in Graubünden in Switzerland. You might be hiking or skiing off to a Hütte, a little ski hut somewhere, which is out of range. So we would consider that offline. So if we wanted to transact and buy a little raclette or a fondue or something in a Hütte up on the mountain, he might not be able to accept an online transaction. So you'd have to transact offline. And so some of these technologies, provide an offline solution and others don't.
Okay. I mean, here in the hut, we could have used Twint, which is a
the
QR
Swiss
code.
one.
Yeah, which is technically possible. So that's really working in the mountains.
That's true.
But so why not just using the existing payment service providers, the existing infrastructure, which does a lot of transactions online and offline, and just regulate them differently, or adapt that technology?
Yeah, I think they're. Existing technology rails are certainly going to play a role and an important one. But as we move, Max, toward a digital economy, CBDCs are going to become the lifeblood of the economy.
The lifeblood.
The lifeblood. Well, it's going to be the money that we use increasingly. We are already seeing around the world that more and more reduction in the use of cash. Switzerland being a notable exception, but we're only a country of 8 or so million here. But in many places that I travel around the world, even in developing countries, we're moving to cashless.
Yeah,
a cashless economy in general.
What is your personal take on cashless economy? Are you in favor of that?
I think more and more, it's certainly convenient, right? I think there's been backlash in certain countries where there's been some fear mongering, so to say, around CBDC and it being used as a control mechanism. I'm not going to hide that. I think it's important to bring that out in this discussion. But a lot of this comes down to the policies that central banks put in place around privacy and anonymity. And the technologies are already there to allow fully anonymous and private transactions, right? I mean, we're talking beyond, using zero knowledge proof and stuff like that. There are technologies out there which can be used. So, also think it's important to use open source technologies when central banks are considering CBDC. so they can avoid a vendor lock-in situation, right? I think is also important, but maybe that's getting too much into the weeds.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, let's say what are a couple of people have fear of CBDCs or of digital money. What's your take on that? I mean, if you advise central banks, then you are in the heart of what their concerns are, and also they would like to know when they elect or select different vendors. What are threats of digital money?
Well, are they really threats? I think again, it hinges a lot on privacy, on anonymity, and whether or not you, Max, can transact privately and anonymously, and not be under the watchful eye of Big Brother, so to speak. But
Yeah,
my argument would be we already have that today. Your credit card information can be subpoenaed, right? You can have all of your transactions across your cards and online transactions come under review in a court, for example. So that's already largely possible. I think in countries where cash is still very important, and there's a number of these countries. I think Switzerland is one of them. New Zealand's another one where the electorate, the population largely came back and said that we would also prefer to have cash. I think there will be two solutions running in parallel. There'll be a digital cash, which is CBDC, and there will also be cash. But I think you will see increasingly a dwindling of the use of it.
Is it cash? Okay. I mean, I heard a lot of that programmable money is where a lot of people are fearing from, that you can just switch off the access to your money from a centralized system. Maybe that's already also possible now already. But is this relevant for the central banks to be programmable?
So
in the selection process?
Yeah. So in some countries, it's out there in the public domain. If we look in Singapore, for example, with the MAS, they have something called PBM, purpose-bound money, which, again, as the name suggests, can be distributed with a specific purpose. It ultimately comes down to the decision of the central banks, what technology they want to go with, and how they want that money to be used. So I would encourage people to get more involved.
Okay, maybe you can give us
decision making. Yeah.
What are the top 3 criteria central banks look at? Is there something where you say these are the top 3 criteria how they select or prioritize for also the navigation for the technology decision?
I think certainly I've touched on one, which was offline, and then I think the other one would largely be resilience. So there's the cybersecurity element. There's a lot of discussion now around quantum. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the vendors are starting to really incorporate and think about, how quantum threats, would be handled within the context of their technology solution. Mm-hmm. So I think those two are certainly very hot button topics at the moment. Certainly, increasingly, one of the great themes at WEF this year is certainly AI, right? So, I think if you think about data and the data that you have with a digital currency, the applications of AI within that for any number of reasons are also important.
What would you say, you touched base here about the AI topics, what would you say is the other hot topics in the CBDC field here, or stablecoin field? What panels have you attended or spoken about? Besides EU regulation, by the way.
Yeah, sure. CBDCs are not as hot a topic this year at WEF. They were more so last year and the year before. Stablecoins, I think, are proliferating everywhere, right? So we're seeing stablecoins now, balloon and mushroom all over the world, and I think that's a great thing because I believe that stablecoins are really a bridge to CBDC. But as I was saying to Michelle from your team earlier, as we sit here in Switzerland, up until 1850, actually, which was also the year that California became a state, up until 1850, there were more than 860 currencies here in Switzerland before the Swiss National Bank was formed and decreed that there would only be one currency, and that's the Swiss franc.
Wow, I did not know that.
Very interesting. And I think we're seeing the same thing happen now with stablecoins.
Yeah.
Right? And it's important to remember that stablecoins are not money. CBDC is money, right? Stablecoins are only a reference to money.
Yeah.
I mean, they can be a reference to other things. They could be a reference to a commodity like gold.
Yeah.
They could be a reference to a basket of currencies or what have you. But they are a reference tool. They are not really a currency, so to speak.
Well, yeah,
or
but
money.
they are asset backed. So in the end of the day, that gives the stability that there's something behind it.
In theory, but the liability, remember, with CBDC, the liability sits with the central bank, right? When you're holding CBDC, like when you're holding a 100 franc note, that is a liability of the central bank. Whereas when you're holding USDC in your digital wallet, that's a liability of Circle.
Yes. No, absolutely. I mean, it's also can be seen interesting that you want to be decentralized, and then you have a centralized company who provides that service or that liability to you.
That's right.
And then has assets backed, which are, let's say, T-bonds or I don't know, other state bonds, right?
People are getting creative.
What a comment. And a long web day. I like it.
At Chavanette these days, we're hearing all sorts of things pitched to us, right? Where we've heard it all.
So what do you think about the Swiss regulator FINMA on their paper about stablecoins? They made a recommendation. I don't know if you read that in Hong Kong too.
Yeah, it makes things difficult.
Exactly.
There's only a couple of I guess there'd be only a handful of financial institutions that would really fit that bill, so to speak.
Yeah.
Certainly makes it a bit more complicated, but as you know, you have the Swiss stablecoin under development, right? In partnership, I believe, is with Postfinance. If you like, I think also maybe the Basler Cantonal Bank. I can't remember who else was involved, but the SNB is focusing on wholesale first, and then also supporting this Swiss stablecoin. But yes, if you think about it, they're also limiting the proliferation. They don't want to end up with 860 currencies again.
Oh yeah, that would be a very interesting development.
Maybe they don't want history to repeat itself. They've seen it. So
that's definitely a very good argument. No, but last time when I was at Hong Kong FinTech Week, we had a panel there, and the discussion was exactly about, let's say, is Switzerland going back with the current regulation? First, they were the first ones who gave clarity in the digital asset space, and now they, let's say, give some say this is against the economy here, and probably more projects are going somewhere else. Would you consider it as well?
I mean, we're hearing the same frustrations from some of our clients here in Switzerland, that Switzerland was perceived initially, not just perceived, they were in reality quite progressive. Yeah. Certainly with Crypto Valley, and then you've seen Plan B in Lugano, for example. I mean, all these things, were really lighthouses, right, beacons for other jurisdictions around the world. And I think they've definitely taken their foot off the gas, and I would just suggest that the race has not yet been won, right? There's a lot of jurisdictions that are busy, been playing catch up, and are now increasingly open to crypto and whatnot. And I think that that's also going to, again, in the same way that Libra did, or Diem as it was called.
Yeah.
I think it's going to increasingly now put some pressure on the central banks to continue their CBDC efforts.
So, talking about the different jurisdictions who now have maybe changed the regulation, what do you think about the US?
With the new administration,
Correct.
I mean, what a wild, last 48 hours or so.
Yeah.
I was in, Hong Kong, just the day that I was flying to Zurich to come here to WEF, and I was just watching the Trump meme coin moon. I just couldn't believe.
But then Melania came.
Then Melania came. Well, actually, Melania hit when I was over Kazakhstan. So I was on crypto Twitter over Kazakhstan and watching Melania, begin its moonshot, and maybe only regret that I was not set up for trading on the plane. But you win some, you lose some. But I think in this administration, what's interesting to watch is Trump is actually quite anti-CBDC, right? He's been, and so is the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. So, I think they've started with their fast payment system, so FedNow, as they've called it. I think that lays the groundwork. We really need to see what's going to happen in the next couple of years. But while he's very anti-CBDC, I've also noticed that the digital dollar project is going from strength to strength and hiring people. So I don't know. I would say watch that space.
Yeah. Would you say CBDCs are boring?
I mean, in comparison to watching a Trump coin moon in over a 24-hour period, I think certainly. But I think it's more about being through. It's being present for this great transformation that's taking place. Right? We've seen obviously a lot happening in the crypto space. I think in commercial banking, you're seeing this great transition to digital banking, which has been taking place around the world, and really, for us to move to a digital economy, central banks are also going to have to digitize. Yep. And CBDC is really the wedge, right? So you can start with CBDC, but at the end of the day, your whole core banking system and whatnot needs to become CBDC native, right? So it's one of the next big transformations that needs to take place. It started. Yeah. We're starting to see it. But I think it's going to be an increasingly interesting space over the next 10, 20 years.
Which topics do you think are overrated this year at the forum?
We did touch on AI. I think you can overdo AI. I will say, I think, agentic AI, where you have AI making decisions for itself, is extremely interesting and a very hot topic, but also pretty scary. I think we need to see regulation, and we need better controls based on, I'm not going to name any names, but some of the projects which I've been looking into the last couple of weeks, I think leave the door open to being misused or abused rather. So yeah.
Some others said EU regulation. I heard that 2-3 times during the last 2 days already, that was a quite open discussion topic. But I think, thank you very much for your time here, and I wish you really nice more days. And thanks for being here, and have a good week.
Thank you, Max, and the team for having me.
Thank you.